Hello everyone, I'm Professor Geek. Welcome back to the channel. So last video we talked about the Universal Monster sequels, and we stopped short of the Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, because Abbott and Costello did a whole series of where they're meeting the classic monsters and whatnot. And of course Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein is a classic because Bela Lugosi and Lon Chaney Jr. returned for that, as well as Glenn Strange as Frankenstein. But we'll talk about that, give them their own video, because that brings into the comedic element of it, and we'll talk about that step in the evolution as well. But I want to say a few words about Bela Lugosi's other turns at playing a vampire. Because tragically, he was supposed to be a part of Dracula's daughter, but, you know, things behind the scenes, drama, this and that or whatever, and he was kind of on the outs. And they didn't bring him back into the film. And Dracula's daughter survived, without it, but it would have been so cool to see him there. And, it's about his daughter trying to sort of, resurrect him. That was the planned scene and whatnot. But, she comes in certainly as Bela Lugosi's Dracula's daughter. When he left Universal there, I mean, of course, he still did stuff with Universal, playing Igor and playing the creature and in other films. But he went with Todd Browning. Todd Browning was the director of the first Dracula movie. And he went to do a talkie remake of a silent film that Todd Browning had done. London After Midnight, I think it's called. I might have that name slightly wrong, just off the top of my head. But it's a classic, tragically, it's a lost silent era film that everybody wants to get their hands on because it was Lon Chaney Sr. in a vampire role. Really cool makeup. You can look up Lon Chaney as a vampire, look up the Todd Browning lost silent film, you'll see it. We have a lot of stills and a lot of images from the film, but we just don't have the full film. There's a really great YouTube link that I watched back in the day. I'll try to find the link and put it in the chat, the comments below, the description rather, for the video below. But they took all of the available images from the film that we have, and they kind of strung it together and tried to make a narrative out of it to give you the general gist of the story, which is the general gist of it. It's what the story would have been. We know that much from reading reviews and reading, press releases of it. So we know the general story of it. This was before Bela Lugosi's Dracula in the United States, of course. So, of course, by the end, you have to realize that, it wasn't really a supernatural thing. It was this and that. I don't want to give too much away of that. But it was just so great. Lon Chaney in this wonderful, vampire makeup. Lon Chaney Sr. After Dracula, though, Todd Browning, who directed Dracula, took Bela Lugosi and Lionel Barrymore and some other great actors, and they did a different version of that film called Mark of the Vampire. I keep wanting to say Return of the Vampire. We're going to talk about that in a second. But Mark of the Vampire. It's the same deal. You're dealing with, you find out what's really going on at the end. But it's a wonderfully atmospheric film. And it really, if you watched London After Midnight, the Lon Chaney Sr. one with Todd Browning, or at least watch, research it, read the premise of the story, watch, look at the stills that still survive. Then you watch the original Dracula with Bela Lugosi. You see so much of the Dracula story was already in the original silent film, London After Midnight. And then so much more of the Dracula movie pervades this new remake called Mark of the Vampire. Bela Lugosi is basically playing his Dracula role. He doesn't speak until the very end, and he's not on screen all that much. His character is important, but it's not, a main, character that's on screen all the time. But every time he comes on, that presence, he's in the Dracula cape. He's, he's still, he's not too far removed from the age that he played Dracula, which was like, he was in his 50s, I think, or right around 50 or whatever when he did the Dracula first film. But it's just great. It's great to see. The other characters are wonderful. And a lot of the same setup is there. The vampire at the next house over, just as it was in Dracula. The young woman in this house, being preyed upon by the vampires, just as, so it's a lot of the setup is the same, but they do some really cool stuff with it. And I don't know if this is the very first instance of this kind of thing in a classic monster movie, but we really get the concept of hypnosis. Mesmerists, hypnosis, that was a big thing. Freud and Jung and all of that wasn't too far removed from, that time period. So the idea of mesmerists were a big deal, were they supernatural? Was it just psychology? Should we trust this or not? And the idea of hypnosis, was a thing that was overblown to a certain degree in films, obviously, but it starts to be pushed into monster movies a little bit. And even though Mark of the Vampire, again, it's a remake of a film that's kind of we explain away what's really going on at the end. It's not totally supernatural or whatever. It still has a really cool use of hypnosis. So I recommend Mark of the Vampire. It's a fun movie. Lionel Barrymore's great in it, sort of the Van Helsing-ish character. Bela Lugosi's wonderful. It's a great movie. It's a good movie. I don't like the little let's explain away the supernatural thing, but that was just a whole trope of films, in Hollywood at the time. So it's great. It's great just to see Bela Lugosi in that costume again. Wonderful. I just want to say a few more words about Mark of the Vampire. Listed on the writer's list is also John Balderson, of course, who was one of the writers of Dracula. And the movie, even though Bela Lugosi doesn't play an actual vampire by the end of it, you realize, it really did go a long way of further cementing him as the face of Dracula, the face of a vampire. It just, he was in the game still. It didn't matter if there was still John Carradine or other actors playing vampires in movies. Bela Lugosi had the presence, and he was still Dracula. And the movies he would do, later would further cement that. But there's that. Also listed in the writers of Mark of the Vampire is Guy Endore. And if you followed my channel last year, you remember that Guy Endore would later go on to write the great novel Werewolf in Paris, or Werewolf of Paris, forget the preposition there. But I mentioned last year that it's not anywhere near a famous book, but it really is aside from Jekyll and Hyde, which I said that's the pivotal literary work. We looked at the seminal literary works, the classic literary works that these archetypes came from. Dracula, of course, or the vampire from Bram Stoker's Dracula, Frankenstein from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and then, of course, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson really started that idea of the duality of man, which is what the werewolf and the wolfman would springboard out of. But we don't really have a classic novel that's explicitly dealing with a wolfman that's of that caliber and in those same themes. Jekyll and Hyde is the closest thing, and it's, pretty similar. But Werewolf of Paris, Guy Endore's Werewolf of Paris, I would recommend reading right after you read Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Hyde and Mr. Hyde, because it's great. And it really does take those themes and develop them into the Wolfman story. If you need a film version that's somewhat tenuously based on Guy Endore's novel, there's Curse of the Werewolf from Hammer Horror later, but we'll get to that at another time. The next time Bela Lugosi played a vampire, basically Dracula, and this happens right before, or this is the last one before we get to Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, in which Bela Lugosi plays the named character of Dracula once more. But the next one is Return of the Vampire, or The Vampire Return. No, I think it's Return of the Vampire. This was not a Universal monster movie, so they couldn't call him Dracula. He gets the name Armand Tesla. But it's a really great little film. He's basically Dracula. They do some different things with the story, though, which is really cool. We have a... I don't want to spoil it, but I want to talk about some certain things in it. You find out at the very beginning, this character, Armand Tesla, was once somebody who studied. He was the great expert on vampires. They don't full out say it, but it's almost like, what if Van Helsing had gazed into the darkness so long that it finally gazed back and he became a vampire? That's kind of the setup. It's almost playing with that idea. Armand Tesla, this, previously this foremost expert on vampires, eventually became a vampire himself. And that's who Bela Lugosi plays in the full Dracula getup. He has a henchman, but this time his henchman is a werewolf. And this is the first instance I've ever seen, I think, of a werewolf being the servant of the vampire. Now, that's a trope that happened. We've seen it on and on and on. We've seen the conflict between the two, the lycanthrope and the vampire, Dark Shadows, Underworld, that's become a thing. But I think this might have been the first pairing of that. And it's so interesting because they use hypnosis again. We talked about it a little bit in, with London After Midnight and Mark of the Vampire. But they use hypnosis again. Dracula, Armand Tesla, the Dracula character, Bela Lugosi's character, uses mesmerism, hypnosis, to bring on the werewolf curse on this character Andreas. And it makes him fully wolf out. He's not just thinking he's a wolf. No, he grows the hair, the fangs, the claws, everything. He really does become a werewolf, but it's with Dracula's power of hypnosis. And that there was something to that in the original Dracula movie. You know, Dracula has, even in the original Dracula novel, he does have the power to kind of over people's minds and hypnotize them in ways, but it's really, really gone evolved quite a bit at this point where he can give you the werewolf curse, basically. So that's fascinating, and it's fascinating the character of Andreas, like a classic Wolfman, like a Lawrence Talbot type character, wants redemption and has to find the good in himself to overcome the evil in himself that the vampire has brought out of him. And there's a really great story arc that he has, throughout the movie. I recommend that. You've got your typical things in a good vampire movie. Your pure couple, who are being preyed upon, who are trying to fight against the evil and so forth. You've got your doctors who believe, your policemen who don't believe, and so forth. And it's done very well. You'll see a lot of familiar faces, a lot of these classic monster movies. Some of the actors, came and went. But it's done quite well. And again, it's Bela Lugosi. There's some wonderful shots. There's a shot when he appears, this woman's playing an organ, and he just appears, and lit, like the Dracula makeup, just staring at her. Beautiful shot, beautiful scene. He delivers his dialogue so well. He does a very great job at being Dracula in this movie, in which he's not named Dracula. And it's the last time we'll see him until we get to Abbott Costello Meet Frankenstein, which we'll talk about. Don't worry, we'll get there. But I just wanted to say this, or to mark this little bit of an evolution in between time in the idea of the vampire, really highlighting his powers at mesmerism, and the idea of maybe playing with the idea of the Wolfman as a victim of a vampire, as a victim of Dracula, as a servant of the vampire. That's something we definitely seen played out. Underworld Origins, or not Origins. What was the name of the Underworld movie that was the backstory, the prequel? I mean, that's when you really get the whole werewolves serving vampires or being forced to serve vampires idea. So yeah, I recommend these two films, Mark of the Vampire, Return of the Vampire. You can get them easily, rent them, or watch them online, usually for free, someplace like, a Tubi or something like that, or Pluto TV or something like that. But, they come and go. But I definitely recommend you check those out, and that's the next step that we're looking at anyway in our little evolution of the archetypes. We will look at more next week, and don't worry, we will get to the Hammer horror. I know we've got huge Hammer horror fans, and I'm with you. I love the Hammer horror stuff. Christopher Lee's excellent as Dracula. We're going to talk about that, so don't worry, that's coming.